So what is race and racism? Race can mean a person's colour, nationality, ethnicity or citizenship. It's a protected characteristic in law under the Equalities Act of 2010 across the UK. This means it's illegal to discriminate against someone or treat them differently because of their race. Now, it's important to remember that someone's ethnicity or national origin may not be the same as their current nationality. For example, somebody may have an Indian national origin but be living in Britain with a British passport. Race also includes different ethnic and racial groups. This means a group of people who all share the same protected characteristics of ethnicity or race. General examples of racial groups include Black, British, Black British, British Asians, British Sikhs, British Jews, Romani Gypsies and Irish travellers. Racial discrimination, or racism, is when someone is treated differently because of their race, ethnicity, nationality or colour. Any type of racism or racial discrimination is abusive and distressing for children and young people, especially those who go on to experience or witness it. If someone commits a crime against you because of your race, it's considered a hate crime and is against the law. Instances of bullying, where there are racially motivated factors associated with it, are not a crime, however they are considered racist incidents. So now let's turn to the types of racism and racial discrimination. Racism, racial discrimination, and racial bullying can take many forms, and children and young people may experience more than one type of racism. For example, a young person experiencing racial bullying in school could also be sending abusive comments or be sent abusive comments online and face racial discrimination at their workplace. Racism can also happen alongside other forms of discrimination or abuse. Racism or racial discrimination can include discrimination in itself. Discrimination involves treating a child or young person worse than someone else in a similar situation because of their race. It can include policies in school, workplace, or similar organisations that disadvantage people from a particular racial group. Turning to harassment, harassment involves making a child, young person, or adult feel humiliated, offended, or degraded. Harassment can be through spoken or written words, offensive emails, comments, online jokes, physically, or through facial expressions as well. In terms of victimisation, this is when a person is treated badly because they have made a complaint of racial-related discrimination under the Equality Act of 2010. It can also happen when someone is supporting a person who's complained about racial or racial discrimination. And then we have two different types of racism. Firstly, we turn to overt racism. Now, this involves making openly racist remarks to a child, young person or adult. It can include racist comments, such as being called racist names, or being sent insulting messages or threats. It can also include physical violence, assault, or damaging a person's belongings. Now, covert racism involves making comments that devalue or put someone down because of their race. These comments, or microaggressions, reflect racial prejudice and can make young people feel as though they're less important because of their race or that they don't fit in. Examples include things like saying, "I don't see colour," which may come from a well-intended place but doesn't recognise the diversity which actually does exist. If you claim not to see colour, it can mean you're not acknowledging a young person's identity and lived experience. The Huffington Post did an article, which I will link to this episode, around microaggressions that black people deal with, and it's a really useful resource to start that conversation. So now let's turn to how racism affects children. We know that racism and racial abuse or bullying can be really distressing for children and young people. When a child is bullied or treated differently because of their race, it can lead to feelings of isolation, depression, anger, or even shame about their race or how they look. In 2019 to 2020, Childline delivered 547 counselling sessions where racist bullying, racism, or being bullied for spiritual, cultural, or religious reasons were mentioned. In the same year, there were 75 contacts to the NSPCC helpline from adults with concerns around these issues. Racism or racial bullying can be overt or openly hostile, such as being called racist names or being sent threats. Or it can be covert and harder to recognise, involving subtle comments that put a young person or child down and devalue their experience or identity. Both types of racism are equally distressing for children and young people and can have a significant impact on their mental health. Covert racism can affect young people's self-esteem and support the idea that it's okay to challenge a person's experience. This type of racism is subtle and can make it seem like it's okay to dismiss racial prejudice or discrimination with comments like, "It's in your head," or telling someone that they're playing the race card. These comments can be very subtle, but are no less abusive, painful, and humiliating for children and young people. So turning now to how to talk to children about racism. Children and young people will have seen images and stories in the news recently around the Black Lives Matter movement. They may have also heard or taken part in recent conversations around racism since the murder of George Floyd and many others in the US. However, some children may not fully understand what's happening and may have questions. And it's important to encourage positive and open conversations about race and racism with children and young people. And to have them often, not just when Black Lives Matter is covered in the news. It's important to keep that conversation going. So, in terms of some specific advice in each area, thinking about how we can teach children about race, racism and privilege, we need to start by recognising that sometimes we feel uncomfortable talking about things we don't know much about. If a child asks you a question which you don't know the answer to, it's okay to suggest that you learn together. There are some really good resources which will be in the resource bank link below this video on Safeguarding Days, which can be a great way to improve your understanding around race and racism. They come from the Huffington Post around microaggressions that black people deal with, A Parent's Guide to Black Lives Matters, the UNICEF Research UNICEF Anti-Racism Resource Pack, and Beyond the Golden Rule, A Parent's Guide to Preventing and Responding to Prejudice. But we know that to have open conversations regularly is a really important factor. Whilst many parents or carers may feel afraid of saying the wrong thing, having an open conversation with children will help children learn about how racism still exists and to recognise how it affects them or people they know. Talking openly can also help a child to feel more comfortable sharing how they feel with you and to confide in you if they're experiencing or seeing racial abuse or racism. The New York Times article Talking to Kids About Racism Early and Often and Today.com's How to Talk to Kids About Race and Racism provide a really useful starting point for these conversations. Another top tip is to try and make conversations age appropriate. While many parents may be worried about speaking to younger children in an age appropriate way, research shows that children can internalise racial bias between the ages of 2 and 4. It can help to describe racism in a way that your child will be able to understand. For example, you could talk about fairness, being kind, and accepting others for who they are. For older children, let them lead the conversation so they feel confident sharing their ideas or experiences. It's important to provide a safe and comfortable environment for them to express themselves in by listening and asking questions without judging them. Talk about recent history and culture. It's important to show children that Black history isn't just slavery, oppression, and segregation. You could tell them about Black contributions and stories that aren't linked to the struggle of slavery and civil rights. It could also help to diversify the books that your children read and films or TV shows that they watch. And finally, it's important to encourage children to appreciate diversity. It can help to explain to children that we aren't all the same. The human race is diverse, and that is a good thing. The world would be a very boring place if everyone was the same. This can help children to notice race and appreciate it. It encourages conversation, understanding, and empathy with people who are different from them. I want to turn now to a direct quote from a girl aged 12, and she spoke to the NSPCC and said, "I'm struggling with the racist bullying I get at school. I feel like everyone is against me. School is quite an isolating place and no one has ever stood up for me. I don't really want to address it to the school because, well, that'll create more drama and it will make more people turn against me and my school life will be even more miserable. I'd rather the school did a talk about racism and history." If a child tells you that they've experienced racial bullying or abuse, whether they're being called names, excluded because of their race, attacked or threatened, it's important to know how to start them, and that starts simply by listening. It's really important to listen non-judgmentally to what a child or young person is telling you. Their experience is real, it's painful, and they have come to talk to you about it. Show them that they can trust you by letting them know you're there if they want to talk, and thank them for confiding in you. So whilst listening, just like we would with any safeguarding concern, it is important to show you care, take an accurate record, and share those details with the designated safeguarding lead. But throughout that, it is okay to feel uncomfortable and not quite be sure what to say. What's most important is to show empathy and acknowledge the seriousness of what they've shared and how it's affected them. If you're a teacher, pastoral leader, non-teaching member of staff, volunteer, governor, remember that it's never the child's fault if they're experiencing racial abuse or bullying. If you're the designated safeguarding lead or a member of the safeguarding team, it's important for you to remember to support parents and reinforce the need for them to support their child emotionally, encouraging them to let them know that they care about them and that they can always be honest with their parents. Sometimes a child or young person may need to be able to cry or express their anger or hurt about what's happened to them. This could be through counselling or with an adult that they trust. It's important to be led by what that young person or child feels comfortable with, but you can always reassure them that it's okay to express how they feel and that there's different types of support available. Children and young people under 18 could also contact Childline to talk this through with a counsellor. If you're in a position of authority, for example at a child's school, it's best to refer to our safeguarding and child protection processes around dealing with safeguarding and peer-on-peer abuse. In particular, we would look to Part 5 of Keeping Children Safe in Education, which guides us around peer-on-peer abuse and our response to it. And this may mean excluding the person responsible for the racial bullying or abuse, addressing further staff training, or changing our own processes and educating the child's peer group on diversity and inclusion in response. In terms of when to report a crime to the police, being bullied or being treated differently because of race is a hate crime and it's against the law. If you're worried about a child experiencing racial abuse or bullying, it's important to get help right away. You or the young person can report it to the police by calling 999 in an emergency or 101 at other times. You can also report hate crime online via the government's website. Childline offers a range of support for young people around racism and racial bullying. Moving forward, the Safeguarding Days platform will have a specific section where you can alert us directly at the trust to any concerns that you may have around the way that we are handling concerns in this area. And further to that, I would actively encourage you to reach out to me, your colleagues, and other professionals in the sector to support you as you support children in this area.